Well, welcome everybody. We are Land Justice Futures. We are Brittany, Sarah, and Amy from the team here today. Um, Many of you are no strangers to us, and you probably know us through our webinars and workshops about land justice. We work with religious communities to incorporate the work and the call of land justice into the decisions that they and many of you make about the lands you love and steward. And from the core of that work and the foundation, the spiritual foundation that drives it, we have been working to prepare this bigger and broader offering to a larger circle of people here. And we're really excited to introduce that to you today. So with that, I will invite my wonderful co-founder, colleague, sister, Sarah, to set us up and share more.
Thanks, Brittany. As Brittany mentioned, you're here, or at least we hope you're here because you're interested in learning about mother law and complicit no more, and this new Motherhouse initiative and starter series that we're launching in just 2 weeks this September. This is the last of our two.
Yeah.
Oop, oop. Sorry, we might mute you just to support everyone's listening. Yes, so today will be our last of 2 introduction events. Our team will be giving you a bit of a sneak peek of what's coming, the details of the starter series and who's involved, as well as, really importantly, sharing where this initiative is coming from and how it came to be a part of our work. So Motherhouse, this new initiative, is a space where we're going to be deepening in the work of removing our consent, our material, spiritual, psychological consent from the colonial systems of domination and extraction that lie within us and exist all around us. And it's also going to be a place where we learn about and practice realigning with something else, realigning with mother law traditions. And we'll get to that in a second. This Motherhouse initiative is also going to be a place where we build community, a broader community, and a movement to be complicit no more in the culture that is destroying life, and remember how to put life back at the center of all we do. So this upcoming starter series this September will be the foundational course for this new initiative, which will continue to grow and evolve. Right off the start, I want to say that this initiative is not something that we at Land Justice Futures have come up with on our own. In fact, this initiative is coming out of the work and lives of generations of women and has directly emerged from and through 2 women pictured here who we work with. Mama Bear Louise Hearn, who is the condoled clan mother of Mohawk Nation, Bear Clan, and Michelle Shenandoah, who's the founder of Rematriation. And you'll hear more about them and the story of how this starter series became real. So again, this came through them and was encouraged through our advisors. You might even say that we were organized into this body of work by our Black and Indigenous partners, as well as by Spirit. That feels really, really true. So that's a little bit of a preamble. So to get into where this work comes from, this new initiative, we'll be sharing this story for about 20 minutes or so with some fun visual aids and a pause or two to reflect. So I'd love to invite you to get comfortable and let yourself be in a receptive mode for story time. To begin our version of this story, there are many versions, but our version, we'll need to go all the way back to the 1400s. There are a lot of places to start any story, and given who we are and who we work with and the work we do, we're going to start in 1400s Europe. During the 14th and 15th centuries, Europe was in the midst of a massive societal transformation. Common people had long been living off of common land, so men and women doing various kinds of labor to meet their needs, making and selling goods at market, selling beer, brewing beer, subsistence farming. And while many peasants lived within a feudal system, work existed mostly outside of wage labor. In the 1400s, kings, nobles, and clergy sought to consolidate and claim these large swaths of common land. So the land that people used for farming, grazing, hunting, collecting medicines, and all sorts of community and social use. And this campaign pushed everyday people off of the land and deprived them of the means to care for their needs, forcing them to sell their labor for money in a new wage labor economy. So this is the beginning of the wage labor economy. This campaign to enclose land into private property was very violent, and there was a lot of resistance. Kings and nobles, along with the church, crushed this resistance, including through the terror campaign known as the witch hunts, where they attacked women who were both the linchpins to their communities and the poor outcasts. They labeled these women demonic, troubled, and insane. Not long after these enclosures, there was another land and labor grab afoot. In the 1400s, or the late 1400s, I should say, during Europe's so-called Age of Exploration, the Pope in Rome wrote a set of decrees which later became legal doctrine, called the Doctrine of Discovery. Again, for sisters who've been with us for a long time, or folks who've been part of our programming for a few years, some of this is going to be very familiar for you, but because this is a foundational introduction, we gotta go over it again. So again, this is a document that later became part of a legal doctrine called the Doctrine of Discovery. These letters granted European princes the right to discover and claim any land that wasn't already governed by a Christian prince, and compelled Christians to, quote, invade, search out, capture, and vanquish and subdue all non-Christians, and take their lands and belongings, and reduce them to perpetual slavery. It made this claim on the ludicrous basis that Christians of Europe were superior to all other peoples, and that all non-Christians were less than. So that image of the boat coming across the sea is a very kind of misleading image of what that project actually was, which was extremely violent. So these letters from the Pope served as the legal, political, moral, and religious justification for the colonization of the entire planet, the theft and control of indigenous lands, and the enslavement of indigenous Africans. All done for the enrichment of the ruling European class and later the European American class, ruling class. Also important context to note is that this violence against non-Christians was very much rooted in the hatred of Jews and Muslims. This is the exact time that the church and state expelled Jews and Muslims from Spain, as well as waged crusades to try to recapture Jerusalem for Christian control. So this document, it might look like it's gathering dust. But these papal bulls did not just compel things to happen and then become irrelevant. The Doctrine of Discovery became a foundational piece of US property law and an active legal doctrine that defines our relationship to land to this day. In 1823, the Supreme Court encoded that logic of white Christian supremacy into US law, naming that discovery is the foundation of title and overlooks all rights held by the natives. This legal ruling was reaffirmed as recently as 2005 by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose first citation in that ruling is the Papal Bulls. So, discovery, quote, quote, discovery by European white Christians is the foundation of US sovereignty and private property in the US. This is how the US government appropriated, through fabricated legal technicalities and structures, indigenous land, and then sold it to settlers throughout the early republic, which those stolen lands then passed from generation to generation. All of this based on a legal fiction, which essentially says European Christians deserve to take things because they are superior and favored by God. And this is true because we, the European Christians, say so. So as we can tell on its face, this is absolutely ludicrous and farcical. And this is what is serving as real, active legal doctrine. So again, the doctrine of discovery is a primary tool and seedbed for the diseased ideology, legal system, and culture all around us of patriarchy, of white and Christian supremacy, and of capitalism. And, this is all a big bummer, but don't worry, we'll get into a different kind of law, which we can orient towards in a moment. So, just to kind of break it down, to summarize, our dominant way of life, what Clarissa Pinkola Estes calls the overculture, is built off of 4 building blocks, which enrich the majority white ruling class. First, the enclosure and commodification of land, and indeed all of creation, as private property. Second, the subjugation of women and women's labor. Third, the theft of indigenous land. And fourth, the theft of Black lives, knowledge, and labor through enslavement, which then, as we know, evolved into other kinds of systemic racism and economic exploitation, which of course we see now through the exploitation of the incarcerated, migrant labor, and workers of the global South. And this overculture was created through and with religious systems that abused patriarchal power and moved further and further away from their true source of divine instruction. And I think this is something that, takes a second to land, but to think about these 4 things being the building blocks of our overculture, and to have happened through the way that people's relationship to God and even their idea of God was used and abused and distorted, is something that I find really hard to take in and metabolize. But it's something that I know that we need to face. So I'm just going to take a moment to breathe with that. Yeah, enclosure and commodification of land, subjugation of women, theft of indigenous land, and theft of lives and labor. Create a modern colonial capitalist economy. So today, it's our work to live in ways that don't depend on these 4 pillars, and instead live in ways that put life at the center of our decisions, our commitments, the way we live our lives. It's time to address the consequences of this domination logic of these pillars. And as we'll get to, it's time for the mothers of the world, the grandmothers of the world, all those who have the nurturing impulse in them to support life, to call the house to order and to unite across race, class, religion, sexuality, nationality, and come together motivated by a deeper impulse towards life and, we believe, greater wholeness. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brittany.
Thanks, Sarah. I haven't been able to switch over, so we continue with the lucky 99, and we will send the recording out to folks when we finish this. So Sarah just set a really big and important historical framework for where we are and some often invisible threads of why we are where we are. And so from there, we're going to fast forward to the 2020s, where we find ourselves in a massive global economy that's been built off of this story and these pillars that Sarah talked about. And inside of a series of crises and injustices that have resulted. Around us, institutions are crumbling, oceans are rising, and an elite few continue to amass power through their own distorted story of how we got here. Meanwhile, in these 20-aughts, starting in 2016 or so, a group of youngish activists and organizers in our 20s and 30s of various or complicated or no relationship to religion, started hanging out with a bunch of Catholic sisters, most of whom were in their 70s and 80s. We found them because we were looking for models of living otherwise. And we came to the surprising conclusion that there's a lot that we share. We share with sisters, and sisters share with us an interest in communal life, an interest and a desire for lifelong spiritual formation with integrity and deep roots, the desire for lifelong vocations of justice work, and for community and the support infrastructure that can enable that kind of life. That space of encounter, which many of you have known as Nuns and Nuns, created a lot of new relationships, and out of those new relationships, new possibilities. During the pandemic, we set out with a new set of questions, trying to understand what this moment was asking of us. We brought those questions to our sisters, to movement partners working on racial and ecological justice, to our peers, to our elders. And what came back to us was this work, organizing religious communities around land justice. And that is how Land Justice Futures was born from and spun out of the Nuns and Nuns movement. At Land Justice Futures, we describe land justice as centering racial and ecological justice and healing in decisions that we make about how land is used, loved, and governed by people. But to be clear, this work runs so much deeper than just shifting the name on a deed or replacing historical wrongs with rights in sort of a one-by-one transactional way. At its core, the work of land justice is a multi-directional journey of healing, of transformation, and of reclaiming our authority in service of life. And I'm going to share just a few glimmers of what I'm trying to convey through some stories. One glimmer of this kind of transformation was during our very first land justice workshop that we gave in Michigan with the Adrian Dominican sisters. I don't know if there's any of you on the call. Hello. And we had a guest speaker with us, a Potawatomi woman who came to speak about land justice and the work of reclaiming Potawatomi cultural traditions. And she really opened up about, one, how emotionally difficult it was to enter the grounds of a convent, coming from a family that went to boarding schools, to Catholic boarding schools, and how surprising and healing it was to find Catholic sisters showing up to do this work together with her. So there was this really deep and unexpected kinship. And she's standing in front of this room full of sisters, and she looks out at them and says, I come from a matriarchal culture, and I know a matriarch when I see one. And I'm in a room full of matriarchs because it takes one to know one. Another glimmer is a story with Pat McCabe. You may recognize her name. She's been on a lot of different webinars and workshops with us and is one of our earliest advisors. And Pat has shared stories of bringing Indigenous women and European descended women to the sites of those witch burnings in Europe. She talked about performing healing ceremony there because it was there where it was because those women were harmed and taken away from the land that their sons and grandsons would be able to cross the ocean in later generations and hurt her people. And when we were in the very first national gathering, land justice gathering with our focus communities last year, Pat saw it all coming and she looked around the room of those focus community members and those sisters and said, I see a new, larger grandmother's council being formed. And I'm just going to take a second to notice that almost all the characters in this story that you've heard about have one big thing in common. They are all women. Everywhere we look in the land justice movement, this work is often led by women. Indigenous women, Black women, white women, Catholic sisters, whether it's doing land back real estate, recreating villages, forging food sovereignty, neighborhood by neighborhood, or creating new kinds of law to support this kind of work. It's the women who are leading. And so you can see why at this point in the story, there's a new word that's emerging in this field of land justice. It's a shift from the word repatriation to the feminine word rematriation when talking about land justice. We're starting to gravitate toward this cultural shift. And when we get to know Michelle Shenandoah, who leads an organization of the same name, Rematriation, that works to restore Haudenosaunee lifeways. And Michelle and her elder, who's a Mohawk clan mother, her name is Louise Hearn, and she's known by many as Mama Bear. They came to a definition of rematriation, not just as the return of land from one group to another, but the all-encompassing return of the sacred to the mother. And Michelle would know something about this because she's the granddaughter of the women who were fighting the US government for their land for over 100 years. That 2005 case that Sarah talked about that reaffirmed the doctrine of discovery with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's signature, that was a case that denied the Oneida people of their lands specifically. That case was about Oneida land, and it's a part of Michelle's family story. And this, there's a picture here of her addressing Pope Francis about the harm of Indian residential schools, which is another big part of her story. So for some time, Michelle has been incubating this dream of women proclaiming themselves complicit no more, of women across lineages who choose to disentangle ourselves from this code of domination that we've inherited for the sake of liberation for everybody. And when she says complicit no more, she's riffing off of a 2012 campaign you may remember as Idle No More. That was an Indigenous women-led movement for the protection of Indigenous rights and the protection of land, water, and sky that originated in what we know as Canada. And so just like they did through Idle No More, Indigenous women have long been putting out the call to dismantle colonialism in ourselves and in the world. And what Michelle is saying is it's a time for a broader response. We all must be complicit no more. And we need a movement that can reorganize each of us across all our lineages around something that is inspired by the authority of women and life givers, the authority to protect and nurture life. And we're going to talk about that more. And they are going to speak to it first from their own Haudenosaunee context. And when I say this word Haudenosaunee, we need to pause and recognize who the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is. Made up of the Oneida, Onondaga, Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, and Tuscarora nations. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, standing for over 1,000 years, is the oldest continuous democracy in the world. Its constitution, known as the Great Law of Peace, deeply influenced the founding fathers' design of US democracy, and 100 years later served as the inspiration for the white women's suffrage movement. And so this lineage is what we're talking about. This Haudenosaunee community is the lineage we're talking about and what sparked this guiding invitation from Michelle and Mama Bear. So to give a couple more glimmers of this story, we meet with Michelle again in 2023. And this time it's at a conference on the doctrine of discovery in Syracuse, New York, Oneida homeland. And this time we've all brought our people with us. So Michelle is with Mama Bear and a group of Indigenous women lawyers and leaders. And we're bringing with us women lawyers from the land justice community, including members of religious communities. We go to a 3-day long law school conference style lectures. And after that, our delegation gathers in a big house on a lake for 3 days in a sort of anti-conference. We share meals, we have conversations in a circle, we share stories and ceremony and prayer. We focus on presence rather than presentations. You can imagine a Catholic nun, lawyer, and a Mohawk clan mother sitting down and sparking an unlikely friendship. And the thing that we focus on is, rather than delving into how we fight the doctrine in the courts, we begin to dream about a system of law that operates entirely outside of the grasp of this domination code. So it's at this gathering, Mama Bear, Beverly Jacobs, Michelle, and others begin Haudenosaunee teachings on what they call mother law. Through stories, wampum belts, principles, protocols, treaties, ways of being, creation stories, there's a transition through all of this and the energy as well. The authority of the mother that stems from Mother Earth and is embodied in these women and elders. And we felt it then. Mother law is an incontrovertible authority to protect and nourish life, to demand that life be centered in all that we do. In the Haudenosaunee context, it's a specific cultural, social, and legal tradition of matrilineal authority. With life bearers placed in the center of society, that governance of the Haudenosaunee Great Law of Peace stems from the inherent authority and autonomy of women. Clan mothers bear the sole authority to raise, select, and recall male leaders, and they are the sovereign decision makers regarding the use and stewardship of land, as well as the authorization of war. On a spiritual level, mother law is the law beneath the law, in which an unbroken lineage of women sustain kinship, belonging, and authority on behalf of all life. Mama Bear's invitation to us gathered here is to let this concept be a springboard for each of our own remembering, for each of us to reclaim our authority and the mother law that lives within the seeds of all cultures and lineages, however covered up it may be, to put life at the center of all we do, to start living toward right relationship now. So this is a really seismic gathering for our team, this work of mother law. And it's an aha moment, a glimpse into the deeper work, a core organizing principle for the why behind land justice. Because it's not enough to just dismantle this doctrine of discovery. We need to be organizing toward its alternative. It's not enough to just do land justice out of guilt or shame. We must do it from a place of deep spiritual authority and for the sake of our own transformation and that of the world. Mother law calls us into healing, into our attunement with life, and into our power. So at this gathering that we were at, a mandate is given. We will do this work and we will do it together. We will create a campaign to be complicit no more, and we will spark a movement for joining in mother law.
Thank you, Brittany. So that was in December, last December. And since then, this work with mother law, as well as the land justice work we've been doing with our focus communities, has been ripening and ripening and ripening. This April, we brought these two forces more closely together, bringing in Mama Bear, Pat McCabe, some of Mama Bear's associates into our Land Justice Futures gathering with our sisters. It was a convening of women elders, Indigenous women, movement leading Black women, and a lot of white Catholic nuns committed to land justice. What unfolded were so many truly remarkable medicinal moments, too many to share, but I'll just share one of those moments with you right now. During a conversation about mother law, Mama Bear really brought it. Here's the slide. Facing this big room full of Catholic sisters, mostly white Catholic sisters. She said, "I am here to fire God." She named how the church and the US, with the name of God and Jesus on their lips, had violently harmed her community and her family. She asked who would stand with her to return everything that was stolen and regain honor and honorable relationship. Slowly, one by one, sisters began to stand until almost the whole room was on its feet, facing Mama Bear, silently standing with her, or sitting and contemplating what would it mean to actually stand with integrity in this moment. One sister, as she stood, said, "The God you speak of is not my God. I fired that God many, many years ago." Another sister, who's been working tirelessly to integrate land justice principles into her community's plans for years, pledged her commitment by saying, "Until my last dying breath, I will work to return what was stolen." It was quite an incredible moment. And this story, for me, shows the way that mother law stands up in her authority for what is right, what is needed for life to flourish and for right relationship to flow. This is what we're called to learn how to do and practice together. This is what we've been asked to do by our partners, and our partners have shown us, and they keep showing us, that we can do this for each other. So this is how the Motherhouse initiative, a place for us to learn and practice this commitment together, in this upcoming starter series on mother law and complicit no more, was born. Through the starter series, you're invited into the powerful medicine that's unfolding within these unlikely convenings, and help shift the culture with the authority that you carry from your own mother line.